Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering disabled individuals, their families, and their support systems for over 20 years. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I curate tools, share mindsets, and promote habits to help the neurodiverse community thrive. Also, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. In this episode, I have the distinct pleasure and honor to have Mark Woodsmall on the channel. Mark is an attorney who founded Woodsmall Law Group, a firm dedicated to special education, regional center matters, special needs trust planning, and conservatorship. Apart from being an amazing human being, Mark has played an instrumental role in my origin story and how I'm now obsessed with empowering disabled and neurodivergent teens and adults to live their most joyful lives. Mark and I explore mindsets and philosophies that should guide legal practice and what meaningful outcomes look like in real time. If I were to identify the one theme that connects Mark and I, it's hope. Our belief in the unique talents of our amazing community holds the hope that we have for a better future for all. Please enjoy this interview with Mark. Hey, Mark, thank you and welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, of course. My pleasure, my honor.
Just as a side note, you and I go way back, and I know that you want deservedly credit for where I am today, and I think I'll have to put that and add that to my I should just add it to my CV. Actually, is how I'll
Fantastic.
do that.
Yeah. Well, look, it was sort of a see a need situation, and I knew somebody who was such an amazing and talented assessor and a visionary. And I said, look, let's get you into transition work. Like long ago, 12, 15 years? I don't even know.
I mean, it's been so long. I mean, yeah, you're definitely part of my origin story. So, but for those people out there that don't know who you are, can you let them know who you are?
Sure. So, I'm Mark Woodsmall. I founded Woodsmall Law Group, and we are a small little specialized kind of firm working in the San Gabriel Valley. We work exclusively for people with disabilities, and we assist individuals in all aspects of the life cycle, everything from early diagnosis and identification of what might be going on, all the way through. I have folks, pushing 50, 60 years old and adjusting to life in the world. The impetus, the inspiration for all of my work essentially came with the diagnosis of my son, Andrew, with, at that time, what was called PDD-NOS, sort of this notion of atypical autism presentation. We really didn't know what it was early on. I remember years back walking in a walk for, at that time, Cure Autism Now. And my wife, who is, of course, the guiding light in all of this, she's always been the one 2 or 3 steps ahead. But she said, yeah, this is really a good place for us to be today. And I said, well, it seems like a really important cause, but I don't really understand why I'm here. And over time, I came to realize that occupational therapy and speech and behavior, those things ultimately add up to this comprehensive sort of approach to autism, which at that time we didn't know Andrew had. So my wife and I are kind of doers. We realized that we needed to get active. I was at that time civil litigator in the Superior Courts, and my wife was, she's a holder of a master's in early childhood education and psychology. So we're sort of geared for this amazing gift and challenge. And we just threw ourselves into it. So that started my road towards taking my legal career direction of serving children like my son, families like mine who are going through this major shift. And frankly, it was very selfishly my way of getting in the company of the very best people in the business, the best speech pathologists, the best behavior interventionists. I needed to know the scientists, the geneticists. I wanted to know everything I could know. Mm-hmm. So that's been, Andrew is really, I think, the inspiration for what I've done in my professional work. I've worked for thousands of children at this point. just with the range of needs. And it's my favorite thing to meet them when they're 3 and to launch them with their high school transition and to see them out in the public, doing all the great things they do.
Yeah. I mean, you have been foundational really in our community in regards to,
Yeah.
not only legal guidance, but being this real advisor, and you had said something before we hit record was that you use as kind of a mantra, which is so wonderful, which I heard as, you're someone that helps people understand what they need to know, not necessarily what they want to hear. And it's super cool to have that when things feel overwhelming. But you also have that paired though with your style of collaboration, respect, and working together with people really, I think, make a difference, because I think without the way that you approach life and just your personality is being so warm, that is, being an advisor in one of these ways, in a legal way, um, that really helps people maybe understand or see things or pull things together.
Well, the manner in which I practice law is actually, it's been well established. In fact, the individual most credited with this collaborative notion of legal practice was Abraham Lincoln, and he basically has a Lincoln method, and that's essentially what I do. The reality is, when you're practicing law, the traditional notion is two parties have a dispute, they enter into a series of steps to resolve that dispute, and most of the time they just sort of move along, they never see each other again. The nature of our work is vastly different. The partners at the table sometimes don't see eye to eye. Sometimes it's intensely emotional, frustrating, exhausting for both parties, frankly. School teachers who've given their lives to the education of children, administrators in the schools that are not villains. They are people who are trying to make something work with the budget that they've got to work with and the constraints of their office. But you've got parents who have this notion of, we're not operating on a fiscal year. We're operating on a lifetime here. I've got this beautiful child. My job, society's expectation of me is that I launch them into the world successfully. So the nature of my work is, how do you take people who on one side of the table are professionally dedicated, maybe it's a dedication of the heart to serve, and help these kids get there? And how do you reconcile that with parents' needs, which are sometimes like, can't you see the whole picture here? I'm looking at the end road. Mm-hmm. And how do I launch my child off so they're ready to fall in love and have a job and do all of those things, right? So for me, the biggest challenge I've got is, I'm an attorney. Attorneys come into the picture. People look at that and they say, well, this person's here to like trick me or make me say something I shouldn't say or catch me, or no, I'm not. My job, if I'm doing it right, and frankly, all of my colleagues, if they're doing it right, their job is to be a source of information, a source of solution, a pathway to outcome. That's what a lawyer does. That's the distinction between being an effective litigator and somebody who pursues justice, in my view. Now, I don't know, maybe this is a little too philosophical and maybe it's too much of a soapbox, but I really believe in it. I really do. If someone leaves a meeting with me and they feel diminished in any way in what they're trying to do to help a child, I really have some soul searching to do. And I'm sure there's maybe 1 or 2 people or 10 out there who say, I didn't like how Mark Woodsmall behaved X, Y, and Z. But for the most part, my goal is to leave these parties in a position better than when I met them, which is help them work together, help them work around a child-centric outcome. What's best for that child?
Yeah.
And so that's how I try to do it.
Yep. Well, and I've seen that firsthand. I mean, you and I have together collaborated and been on many cases together. And so, and I've, been on the stand with you on the other side of it, and with a lot of other attorneys, actually. So it's
Yeah.
not always the most comfortable thing, but, there's one thing that's really clear, and that is, I love how you said this. What is the pathway to an outcome that is self-determined, child-centric, adult-centric, person-centric, right? How do we do that? We do need to then have a space where collaboration occurs. And collaboration occurs when we feel safe to do that.
Right.
And that's important because there is a psychology to that. That I see the minute that people start getting defensive, it really becomes about protection of themselves. And then we are far away from actually student or child centric. So yeah, no, I've seen this firsthand, and it's always fun to be a part of that, and how you're able to I think there's this balance of like being able to directly say something, but in a way that can be heard. And I think, that's something that I see you to be able to do many, many times over. I love that summary. I've never heard you summarize your guiding principles and philosophy that way.
Yeah, I try not to spend too much time on my personal story. I mean, I think it's important that parents understand um, who is this person who I'm coming to see, and what are they about. I mean, honestly, I don't know that a lot of parents in their interview for an advocate for their family, and then I mean that as a legal advocate, of course, but do they understand the person on the other side of the table? I mean, a lot of times when people hire an attorney, they say, "Oh, I want the meanest, most shark-like lawyer I can find," and I would say, "Yes, that would probably help you once, and then what? Because once it's all burnt down, um, how do you reconstruct it? How do you do that when the partners to the process feel alienated, exhausted? They don't want to see you coming. I mean, that's just not it's not compatible with the nature of what schooling or regional center work is,
Mm-hmm.
because these are, again, they're intended to be collaborative platforms, which, if everyone's doing their job, launch the individual, are focused around the individual needs of that child. And so you have to take lots of steps to make the process human, to remove some of the trappings of adversarial, because those things are naturally there. I mean, if you're working with a parent who's desperate for help and feeling like their efforts to get that help have been thwarted, or maybe they've been lied to, maybe they've been told information that led them down a path that was a dead end, the more that goes on, and the fear that operates in this whole process, the more the parent is going to be in their silo. And a good advisor is somebody who can take that parent and say, okay, this is what we've been through, this is our path forward, this is how we try to marshal all of our resources to get that outcome. And then you'll see a simultaneous reduction in stress, perhaps a little bit of help for the marriage that's struggling under this new development. I mean, our families fail at an 80% rate. And when I mean disillusion or divorce, and I think that means now you're trying to raise this amazing child, but in a co-parenting model, which adds a whole other layer of complexity and stress and difficulty. So the key is preserve the people. People are a valuable resource. They need preservation. They need care. And I know it sounds very typical for a lawyer to speak like this. I know that. I spend a fair amount of time around lawyers, and there's a lot of great people in the field, but I don't hear a lot of these discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you respect and you believe that the people are the most important assets in this endeavor, then we have it, then there is trust that's established. And you're right, over time, people come to get legal help because there's a mistrust of the system, usually, right? And so what does that mean? And, dynamically, we know how trust is easily lost and hard to regain. Just interpersonally, we understand that a betrayal, can lead to the elimination or almost all elimination of trust in a relationship, right? And then you got to build it back slowly. This is no different in that. And so sometimes it's nice to have that mediator reestablish trust on a team, which is so great. I love this concept, Mark, of how this type of law is very different from other types of law, because you have to work a lot of times with the same people year after year, right? And that doesn't necessarily end. So yes, while you can burn it down to the ground and get what you want once, what's going to happen when you need to go back to that team again? The next year, let's just say, or 2 years or 3 years later, for that matter. And this brings me to this idea that I've been really struggling with, and it was a real impetus, not only just to have you on the channel, one, to obviously offer your expertise and share your talents, but to help even me understand, what are the legal issues? How do the legal issues change as someone ages into adulthood? Maybe even like thinking about leaving a school system, or aging out of a school system into the regional center system or not. Like how does that legal landscape change?
So you'll have to give me a moment here to give you sort of the disclaimer, right? This is what I'm about to tell you is unique innovation of California law, which is, I presume that with a YouTube channel of this quality, you're going to be out there all over the country and maybe around the world. And so people sometimes get confused about which laws apply. Generally speaking, the statute that governs special education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. And it starts in one form or another, even with 0 to 3 early intervention services. And traditionally, the federal IDEA covers the education of students through graduation with a typical high school diploma, or aging out. And in California, and I believe around the country, that's traditionally associated with the 22nd birthday. Now, it depends when the child's birthday is, et cetera. But in California, we have a unique system that's derivative of the California Welfare and Institutions Code, and it's a subsection of the law called the Lanterman Act. The Lanterman Act was created to essentially provide, and the way I look at this is generally when you're looking at school and you're looking at regional center, which is the agencies that have been created to implement the Lanterman Act protections for Californians that qualify. You're looking at essentially access to home and community, which is traditionally the regional center, and that exists for eligible individuals all the way up through their education. And then the school system, which traditionally is working under the California Ed Code, federal law, with the educational rights of the child. And those distinctions get a little bit strange because sometimes, like, how do you, for instance, separate behavioral supports at home and behavioral supports at school? And how do you ensure that those skills generalize, et cetera? So in California, where the regional center is more of a supportive agency all the way up until the time of transition and onto adulthood, once the child actually leaves the system, whether with a high school diploma and general education standards or aging out, the regional center sort of stands at the ready to help coordinate the vast array of services that are available for adults. Traditionally, and I say vast array because it's spread about, and parents have this really, really tough job of figuring out how to harness in-home support services, Medi-Cal eligibility, which conceivably the child could have irrespective of income, but more determined by disability, California Department of Rehabilitation, housing supports, and all of the things that exist under, specialized housing for people with disabilities. And then all of the array of protections that come along with trying to make sure that the housing is fair, that it's non-discriminatory, the employment sector, all of this. Conceivably, the regional center is supposed to be sort of case managing it all. And as you might imagine, regional centers are stretched very thin. Mm-hmm. They are often required to do this job with very limited resources. And obviously they have large caseloads. So what ends up happening for a lot of families is as they're trying to make that leap from school onto adult services, that's where the challenges rise. Now, the law says, the federal law, IDEA, says that, we have to have transition planning in place, at least by the IEP to be held, and the one that would be in place when the child reaches their 16th birthday. However, there are provisions in law that allow the parties to start earlier, which is if you think that you've got a longer runway than the time you're going to need from 16 to 18 or 16 to 22, you can start transition planning earlier. A lot of people don't know that, or they don't know how to trigger it. And oftentimes, if they ask, it's not uncommon for school systems to say, well, it's not time. Let's go ahead and put things on hold. It happens around 16. And again, well-meaning advice maybe, but wrong. Mm-hmm. And so you try to start to figure out that unique path for the child. Is this a situation where the young person is going to have college? Are they going to have vocational training? How ready are they to be independent in their living situation? Will they drive a car? What is their bus aptitude, for lack of a better word? All these questions start to come into the mix.
Yeah. And that the path after high school or transition program needs to be individually determined. So, we don't have a situation where we clearly know what's next. And a lot of times in the school setting, in elementary school setting, junior high, high school, we kind of know the next grade is the next grade. 5th leads to 6, 6 leads to 7, 7 leads to 8. We continue to, get all the services that have been really helpful. We continue to have those integrated into the school day. And then the next year's 8th grade. And then the next year's 9th grade. But by the time we get to this place where we're going to leave many times a really awesome wraparound support. So I see that a lot. A lot of my clients have wonderful school teams and have had wonderful school services. And now they're leaving this place. And it's overwhelming to know what comes next, and where we should go and the direction that families should take. And I just find it to be probably one of the hardest things, not only for my clients, but also their families to navigate, especially the first few years out of a high school or a school program.
It's interesting. In 2004, which is the last time that Congress revisited the federal statute, IDEA, there were a couple of things that they tweaked, and one of them was that transition planning was adjusted. Congress in the legislative notes essentially states that we've had significant lack of success in our transition supports for young people, that they, despite best efforts by school teams, et cetera, these children just aren't ready. And so the Congress, when they reauthorized the bill, there were specific guidance points added saying that it needs to be outcome-oriented transition, that we should be looking at real results instead of just passing from year to year with goals having been met. Now, there's sort of a cruel intersection that occurs at this time that you're talking about. When I say cruel, what I mean by that is I think parents are mobilized for a lot of the years of early education and into high school, and because, like you said, there's a path. But usually by the time that the child's ready to make that launch into the next level, parents are often exhausted. They're fatigued from the process. And then there's this shift that happens from the school system to the regional center, where we have a shift in the legal standard too, which is Standard, the educational standard is educational benefit gauged in relation to the child, which is what does the child need to receive in order to have educational benefit. It's not considered a really aggressive standard. It's considered a standard where you have to measure the child's making meaningful progress year to year based on who they are and what they need. And we reconcile that with their non-disabled peers. So we try to close the gap all along the way towards diploma acquisition or successful matriculation. Then you go to the regional center, and the regional center standard of law is different. The regional center standard of law is maximization of future potential. That's an incredibly strong standard. Mm-hmm. And yet when you speak to parents, they'll say, well, I haven't had that experience with my regional center. This maximization of future potential says we are looking to normalize their experience for individuals who qualify for regional center supports so that they essentially live lives akin to what their non-disabled peers enjoy. Independent living options, independent work options, marriage and family connections. I mean, these are the things that the law envisions, but the system itself isn't really geared for that successful transition. And in fact, often it feels a little precipitous. It is, you get to the edge and there you are, and this difficulty has inspired so much, like I think about some of our past collaborations, and I'm thinking about, our little vineyard project and your help along the way with that, which is you've always been so gracious with your time and expertise. But, we've had in the micro an opportunity to do some really neat adult training. For, I think at this point, 6 cohorts of students have gone through and they're placed and employed. But I feel like in many ways, so much more has to be done. And I think the system has to be moved in a sort of a major shift kind of fashion, which is, I think we have to look at this system and say, okay, we're getting ready to come into this very difficult transition period. What can we be doing now to make sure that that works? Is our transition information reliable? Is it comprehensive? Do we understand the child? And I think that there's a fundamental disconnect between the child and young adult in the educational context and where they are in the academic standards and where they need to be for that adult situation, whether that's a pursuit of ongoing educational experience, a more of a vocational pursuit, hybrid, which, you can do that too.
Yep.
Can you simultaneously pursue your academics and your vocational skills? Well, yes. Why not? Because it's individually tailored. So why aren't we doing that with more regularity? This is a day in the life.
A day in the life. Yeah. The idea of a longer runway is so important, because if we know that someone needs a longer runway, usually it means that we have to be very intentional about where our energies and time is being spent to support somebody. And if we're going to do that, and we're asking for someone to commit to learning skills or to doing things that might be difficult, it better be aligned with what they want. And so a lot of times, by the time they get to me and I'm doing a transition assessment and I say, what are your dreams for your future? Like, what are your dreams? They're like, I don't know. I don't know what those are, And I'm like, darn it. You don't, let's really sit and talk about that. I want you to tell me all about yourself. I don't know. Okay, well then, show me something. Show me something that you love. Inevitably, you just kind of use a Rosetta Stone to figure that out. But, if I'm doing that and I'm thinking outside of the box, and I often think of myself as someone that is successful, not necessarily because of my training, but because I really like entertaining out of the box ideas. Like I really enjoy that. It's fun for me. But how do we help someone? I mean, without the formal process, they don't even know. And so what I see in transition planning specifically is we've done I've done a little bit of interviewing with a student. I've had them fill out a couple forms or a couple surveys. I don't really know if they read it correctly. but it came back as them wanting to be, I don't know, these odd, weird things that they would never want to do. And then now we're making these goals for transition that are supposed to drive service. But the goals are so generic that they could apply to any high school student. So-and-so will do research on the college of their choice. I'm like, this person said they don't even want to go to college. School's hard. I'm not bought into school. I want to work. I want to work right after high school, And so I love this. There is a mindset shift that needs to happen because you do see students through an educational lens when they're at school. But when you move outside of that, all of life and all of the things that life needs and all the skills that requires really does come full circle. I mean, it hits you. And that it is, like I've always said, it's like an abyss. You just call it like the precipice. You're like, I'm right at the edge. And what people are trying to do now in this space is get really creative about how we help people figure out what their path is for their own productive and joyful living. And how do we sustain that for that person and what that means to that person, that family, how do we define that? And that is, you're right. That's absolutely not something that we talk about in school. And actually, even when we move forward, what I find, the skills that are lacking are usually not the academic pieces that I'm worried about. It's all in the other human stuff that we need to be doing, all the way from, the bus. What did you call it? The bus curriculum, whatever. But all the way from transportation. I mean, I think about mobility a lot living in Southern California. Yeah. But down to money. Should we keep you counting dollar bills? Like, I just want to get rid of those things, I mean, by the time I'm, anyway, go on and on.
Let's move this young person as quickly as we can to debit card, because incidentally, we're all using them. And I'm thinking, wouldn't it be now, I think we awareness of how to work with cash. We do need it from time to time, but we have to look at where we're putting our emphasis, right? I think about this and I think, I see some of those transition surveys you're talking about, and sometimes they just seem so mismatched and unlinked from the realistic dream of that child. Now, that being said, you and I, in our pre-discussions today, we talked about this notion of presumed competence. Mm-hmm. And this belief that the child can go anywhere they want to go, because guess what? If you dream it, it can be. I believe that sincerely. So if you tell me this child wants to train dolphins, okay, fantastic. Well, we don't necessarily have a marine park immediately nearby. So what can we do to start working on that? Maybe we can start some meaningful work with animal husbandry or different access to, a biology lab or so forth. I remember I had this one case in my earlier career, and it involved a young woman who lived in a more rural area here in Southern California. And she was in 4-H and she was, helping to raise animals. And she was excited about the idea of working with, goats and sheep and these things. So the school system in this case was unique. They had this really great animal husbandry program. And the way it would work is you had to be an AP science student. And then you could then have access to a class, which then would allow you to raise a goat and help in the school's barn process. Well, of course, a lot of my students were not AP science eligible because of their special education academics. So you had this really creative program totally unavailable to my kids. So my client who had wanted to do this and had already been very successful in starting to do this with her parents and with her 4-H club, the school district's response to that was she can go to Petco because the Petco at the local mall had pets and she could dust shelves, because that was somehow related to this idea of animal husbandry. And yet at the same time, the school system had this other program that was already geared for her exact needs, but the barriers that the school system had put in place made it impossible. And I couldn't get the administration to see outside of this. So it was an amazing story how it came to be. We ended up in a hearing on this case, and the judge was seated with his bench. His courtroom was set up in the local school administration office where we were having the hearing, and the window behind me was aimed directly at the school's barnyard facilities. So here's the judge looking at this barn, and I'm saying, we need access to a barn where this child can have access to livestock. And the judge is sitting here, and the school system saying, we don't have that option. It's not available. So finally, I said, Your Honor, it's right there. Probably a little bit silly, but the judge remembered that comment. He just said it just seemed so ironic that we're looking at this. So what did we do in that case? Well, without going into too much detail, we were able to find creative ways to link that student with the life sciences teacher who already had this beautiful program. And yes, it's true the child wasn't quite ready academically to be in AP Science, but she did have a meaningful role working with the animals, providing their daily care, making sure their diet was right. We made it work because you could take the concept and find creative ways to work. Mm-hmm. Now, I think ultimately that is the secret here. It's unpacking or unboxing, strict ways of thinking about things, and instead looking at outcome-oriented options. Yeah, one of my favorite cases.
Well, I mean, and it's such a great example because it wasn't that you had to create a whole new, you didn't have to propose that they put a barn on campus. Like, it was already there. So how do we take that, just pivot, right? Have just a little pivot and figure out how that works. And, competence, I think it's so important to presume competence. And that doesn't mean that, when you say, you dream it and it can happen, I don't think that, I don't want people to think, oh gosh, Mark's just Pollyanna thinking, okay, whatever, you believe it, it's, I think what it is, it's like we can make meaningful experiences, even if that means that there is some structure, support, or help that's also involved. But that dream can be a reality, right? The idea of, oh gosh, I want to be an astronaut, and we know what that might take. It's not, well, no, never. It's like, well, what do you love about space? What do you love about that idea? What connects you to that? And then how do we give you an experience that touches that piece? And then let's see where that goes. And so I think a lot of times too, we're terrible at predicting what might work. We're terrible at it. What makes the difference is people being willing to try it, to provide opportunities, and then to make the decisions based on that. But all people, are hopefully connected to something that they want to do and love to do. And then it is reasonable then to put up with the stuff that they don't necessarily want to do in that greater context. So like I think about my job, I hate report writing. It's 15, almost 20 hours sometimes for a report, when I'd rather be working with people, but I know the function that report serves. And so I do it, but it's the thing that I put up with to do something greater that I absolutely love and am so connected to. And I don't know if I'd put up with report writing though, if I was in the context of not liking what I did and I wasn't meaningfully connected with it. And I think sometimes that happens, right? In the work that we do, like, oh, they just have to learn to put up with things that they don't want to put up with. That's life. It's like, well, that's life when there are things that they are actually connected to. And then those things come with it.
Well, I think most people would deem you have to just put up with it and go do what you're obligated to do. They would probably call that a failed outcome. I think you talk about Pollyanna, and I've heard that before. And
I've been accused of it before. Okay, also.
Yeah, me too. And you know what? That's fine, because I actually think this. it sometimes you get that magic going, and the question is, sometimes don't we need that magic? I mean, this is a country that I love the potential of our America, right? The fact that as a country we've already decided that this is an important paradigm for our citizenry. The fact that all people who are here uh, in a very inclusive fashion are entitled to a full experience. And what I mean is, I want to be very careful with this. When I'm talking about an entitlement, I'm not saying kids should just get resources heaped on them and because they're entitled. What I'm saying is, I want the words on that school district wall that sits behind the board talking about we stand for the proposition of opening doors for all of our students for the brightest future possible. I want that to apply equally, which is we have to think together and dream a little bit and maybe spin some of that magic to make these beautiful things happen. Because if it works, it's something we all can be proud of.
Yes.
And quite honestly, it's fiscally prudent use of governmental resources, because if you consider putting time and money and effort into a program that ultimately drops off the cliff versus one that actually results in the child getting a job and perhaps being part of that earning workforce that ultimately, I always say, if we're successful, mom and dad, your child's going to go out and get a job and pay for our Social Security. I mean, that's really what comes down, right?
Yeah.
That is all of our jobs. So yeah, it's dreaming, sure. But not always. Sometimes, and most times, if we are deliberative and focused, we can have it. I just think that people get used to the idea that, well, we'll accept something less, or we can agree that that's good enough. And I've never met a parent yet who says, well, good enough, yeah, that applies to my child. It's just, no, they say no. No, I want them to have the best life possible.
Yes.
The best. That's what a parent's job is. And then school systems sometimes say, well, you're not entitled to the best. You're entitled to educational benefit. And what I'm saying is, you have to marry those visions.
Yeah.
Because the people who are helping implement these programs, they believe in the best too. But they've been told repeatedly, well, we don't have the money, or we don't have the resources, or we don't have the bandwidth. And I can tell you, I've met these teachers that you sit down with them. They're such a pleasure to meet these veteran teachers. And you see them and they're just saying how it is. And teachers like, this is what we're going to do for this kid. This is what they need. So I ask them on a sidebar, I say, geez, aren't you a little nervous your boss isn't going to like what you're saying, et cetera? They said, no, they can't touch me. I'm tenured. At this point, I'm going to do what I need to do for my kid. And you meet those teachers, and it's probably, they're these rare, wonderful folks. And I just applaud them, because they've come to realize, that it's possible. And sometimes you just have to take a stand and say, we're making this happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if that district implemented a widespread program associated with, goat herding and animal husbandry, but I will tell you that at least for that one child, the magic was there. And what I would say is, for parents that are on this road, you have to kind of find a way to refill the reservoir, which is when you find yourself at the other end of this process, your child's getting ready to matriculate out. That's actually the time you have to get active more than ever.
Agreed.
Because that's when you're needed the most. The child's in the most fragile spot.
Yeah. And even developmentally, we know that transition to that young adult, that late teens, early 20s, is an extremely vulnerable developmental time, period, with or without a disability, and that things are, colleges are even taking stances on college readiness. They know that college students do better when they are college ready, and that's not necessarily grades. They're really talking about, do I have the emotional skills to be here? Do I have the executive functioning skills to be here? Obviously in this age appropriate way, brain's still developing. We get it. But, now it's like, well, delay your admissions a year, take a gap year. Like colleges are starting to take that stance because they understand that overall are like are our students ready to face the demands of this setting? And I just think a lot about that. Um, Even if it's, there's so many different, and I think that's another overwhelming thing. Sometimes, parents, there's not something that exists exactly like the school program after school. And
Yeah.
so, there's not just kind of like this linear kind of path that you move forward with. And so now you're really working with regional center, or you're really working with other agencies. You're navigating Department of Rehab. That in and of itself is not easy. You're navigating SSI. You're navigating, I mean, there's all of these new agencies that you have to work with, and where do you put your energy? This kind of idea of economics, energy resource allocation, which I talk about a lot with my clients because it's exhausting and you're tired. And so whatever you do, let's be intentional about it so that feels really good to everybody. And we feel good about where this is going, at least for now. At least.
Yeah, when you consider the potential, right, which is again maximization of future potential. What does that really stand for? Well, I don't know. Where is that child going to go? Is it a micro business, or is it, can you help equip them with a unique and essential skill? I was thinking about there's a friend of the Sparrow program. His name's Greg Pennyroyal, and he's over at Wilson Creek, and he's been our scientific and ag advisor on the Sparrow program. And he's a science guy, and he kind of geeks out once in a while on some of our amazing kids and how they demonstrate. One of the things that we find with a lot of people on the autism spectrum and who are affiliated with the Vineyard is that they're not on their cell phone all during the whole class, chatting their friends or checking Instagram or that kind of thing. They're very focused. And we're finding this really unique skill set that our young people bring to the table, which is in the Vineyard, we have this job called a spotter. And this is a person who goes and looks for leaks in the irrigation. My pandemic puppy over here. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And we need to look for infestation of pests and that kind of thing, disease conditions, mildew on the vines, that kind of thing. Neurotypical person hates doing that kind of work because it's up and down, walking up and down the vineyard, looking with that kind of detail. And yet our kids are like hypervigilant, focused, intent. If you can teach them specifically what to look for, their ability to flag these concerns in the vineyard, I mean, they become these fantastic resources. And a state like California, you've got this, we've got an agricultural state, whether it's grove management, vineyards, crop, whatever it is, this problem is consistent for all farmers. You have to watch for these things. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it be just absolutely fantastic if you could find a way to employ these young adults with a job that's meaningful, pays well, they're coveted and sought after because of their skills? I mean, I'm thinking that's just one example.
Yeah.
Just one example. Every industry has something like this. I think of Walgreens pharmacy and the innovative way that they've looked at working with people with developmental disabilities and what they've done. Their fulfillment facility in the country, as the one that principally employs people with disabilities, is known for being one of the most productive. One of the facilities that has the least amount of absentee workers. Mm-hmm. Why are we missing this as a country? Why are we missing this? And I've heard around the world, other countries have already become aware of these gifts and values. And when one of my opposing counsels is well connected in Israel, and he says that in Israel, people with autism and people with disabilities serve actively alongside their non-disabled peers in the military units, and they bring morale boosting. They bring capabilities and qualities that traditional soldiers just don't exhibit.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, these are just examples. I mean, we could go on, and you can tell. I think, and it's kind of a funny conversation to be had by two people who just love transition.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we could probably talk about this a long time.
All day. I can't even tell you how many other examples. I mean, I've had clients that bust the manufacturing production of X, so much so that the software people had to come back in and recalibrate the top range for a machine. I mean, stuff like that where never absent, always on time, so focused. I mean, and there are lots of examples of that across. And, going back to this kind of abyss, like, where do we go?
Right.
So many times I'm just like, I just want like internships all over the place. Like, can we get internships that's what I want my clients to be involved in. If they're not going to that, if their path doesn't involve college per se in that more traditional way, what they really benefit from or it's like doing a job that they perceive that they might like. And then we learn so much just from a 3-month stint at it.
Isn't it true? Isn't it the exposure that makes the difference? Because I think about that point you've made, and how many young adults have we worked with where they've had the opportunity to get out into the field and they realize that they love doing this. They never knew that they loved it.
Yep.
And how many IEP goals say they're going to explore their options by going to a computer and searching websites that have to do with, I mean, I've seen that on virtually every transition plan that's out there. I mean, how is having a student do a Google search on an area of interest? Number one, how does that take a whole year? Number two, how is that meaningful? I mean, that activity happens in 12 minutes.
We could do it like right in the IEP.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have a year of service gauged around this. And I'm thinking, anyway, I think, I think about Andrew, and we created part of the reason we had the Sparrow program initiated was we thought he would really enjoy a lot of hands-on tactile work. And the funny thing about Andrew was he actually didn't really enjoy working in the vineyard. So we built all this, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we built it for him, and he really doesn't want to work in the vineyard. But one of the things we saw immediately when he was in the vineyard was he started sketching, and he started doing a bunch of art-related activities that were inspired by the vineyard. And I thought this was an unexpected value. We had a young woman I'm thinking of. She came to the Vineyard Project, and she said, "I'm not really interested in farming, but I do like cooking. How can I gain from this program?" And so we just started having a conversation with her about slow food, knowing where your food comes from, understanding organic selection if that's important for your health choices. What could you cook with the derivatives of the vineyard, whether that be grapes or whether that be vinegar or whether that be wine, or on and on. And so then we started saying, well, okay, if you have these base materials, what recipes would they go in? And what from a culinary exercise, what wines would pair with this food so that in the restaurant where you want to work, that this, your guests would enjoy it. You could see how quickly you could take things in whatever direction you want to go and make it meaningful. And I mean, the Sparrow is just one example. It's just the one that I know a little bit than some others. But I know in your work, when I've seen with some of our common clients, some of the beautiful micro businesses that you've launched, and just the pride that our young people have in doing a hard day's job, going to work, doing the time, putting in the work and the effort. Our kids are dying for that opportunity. They
Yeah.
want to work.
Yes, it's a human, and I feel like it's a human experience. To feel productive is what actually allows us to be happy and joyful in our life. That we're making a difference, we're doing something, and that is something that I see to be a universal thing. And going back to Andrew, you built this vineyard and put all this work in, and Andrew's like, I kind of don't like that. And
Yeah, not
but
for me.
yes, yeah, right, not for me. But thanks. But how that kind of goes back to this idea that I shared earlier, which is we're not good at predicting what's going to work. What is important for us to do, though, is to try it, because then we discover other paths and things become clearer. So, the sketching, wow, I didn't realize, like, this is a place for him that might feel therapeutic for him to connect with that part of himself. Okay, that tells
Right.
me something. Maybe he can, illustrate some of the things that we need from a written promotion perspective, or to teach other people. Some of his drawings can be used for that. So again, following, but being able to sleuth it, and being open-minded and really flexible to how we might find that. But I completely agree with you. I've never written a transition goal that says you should get on the computer and do, I'm not even a fan of like career cruising and those types of things anyway, because, well, my clients don't really understand what it's about anyway. And I could have just asked 10 questions and gotten the same information. But wow, internships, always always is enlightening for the team. And so that's why even in my assessment sometimes, I say, well, especially during the pandemic time where we've had to be really creative, where I say, okay, well, masks on, meet at the mall,
Right.
and
Right.
then I need you to order dinner. I want you to show me what you love. Okay, tell me why. Inevitably, or we're gonna go to Trader Joe's and hope that their very helpful staff doesn't help us. And I'm gonna give you a list of they are so helpful. I'm gonna give you a list of 3 things. Go. I can't even tell you what I learned from that 15-minute exposure. Do you grab a basket? Do you not grab a basket? Do you see where the things are located? No, I just go for it. I've got my hands full, but now I need a bag for 3 oranges. I'm just going to put everything on the ground. It's extremely valuable for me. And usually a parent who's in tow is like, my gosh, I've never realized all these things before, And so it is really having this open mind. And I think it's so funny, our intentions were to talk about legal issues related to aging. And instead we really, I think highlighted mindsets and philosophies and guiding principles for how we help our clients determine the life that they want to lead, and how that can be meaningful and productive for them. They get to determine that. How do we do that? And then how do we navigate that in the midst of the governmental agencies that inevitably are part of the puzzle. So I love that we went there.
Yeah, me too. I think the funny thing about the law is you can read the statute and you can understand that transition is to be results and outcome oriented, or it's supposed to be meaningful. And yeah, we understand that. But I think at the end of the day, if you understand that parents need to link their dreams, their goals, their wishes for their children, we need to figure out what the children themselves are dreaming of, and then link that with the understandable limitations of our system, that finances maybe aren't what we'd like them to be. Maybe we'd like a little more finance there. But doesn't that then start the conversation in the realm of innovators, other people who want to be able to show what could be done? And couldn't we give them a platform to demonstrate all that's possible? I mean, we've got this tremendous resource of these young people, and I want us to start to seize that concept. These young people are a tremendous resource for the country.
Yes.
And I think that historically, we as a country have looked at our young people who need that extra or maybe somewhat specially tailored approach as some kind of like line item on the budget. Like they cost X. No, they don't cost X. They're going to do it for us. But, you got to believe in them. That starts with the number one. And then number two is you've got to put in the work. You've got to build something for them.
Yeah.
And we do that. And then we get to, pat each other on the back and tell each other how great we are when in fact the kids were waiting all along.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
love this.
That to me, that's the thing that gets my toes tapping. See the kids really, show us what they can do.
Yeah, and it's a real it's a real honor when we're able to see someone that we might have supported from when they were very young to going through college and being in a career or going straight to a job that they love and are rocking it. And, you and I are now old enough and have been doing this long enough to actually see that.
No, you went there, didn't you?
Well, I mean, but, I still have clients that reach out to me that I don't see anymore, but that I supported for a very long time. And they update me on their life. They update me on their life and what they're doing. And it's an extreme honor and privilege to be in that position because it's like, oh my gosh, like, wow, I would have never, I always knew that there was, that they would find their way with the right, supports and opportunities, obviously. And I think that's what you're saying. Can we create the opportunities in which this can happen? And we know employment and housing are two of the biggest problems for us to solve for individuals with disabilities today. Those two things. But employment especially, people with disabilities make up the biggest minority in the world and are the most underemployed, right? How do we solve that problem, especially when you and I both know that there are very specific talents that when matched with the right job, it's unstoppable. Absolutely unstoppable, So love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something here in a big way. I hope this talk speaks to some families, and if nothing else, kind of breathe some energy back into the process, because the beauty of it is I've been in the trenches with you. I've seen what's possible. And it's always been an honor, of course, to share a platform with you in terms of trying to build something for one of these amazing kids. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. And it's my great honor. I would say helping kids and helping our families advance is it's a tremendous gift, and I'm honored to do it every day.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for your time today and just sharing all your talents. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in finding out more about Mark or Sparrow Vineyards, I've put the information in the description below. If you're seeing this, it means that you've stayed until the end. Thank you. And if you got any value from this video, please hit that like button. Doing so helps to get this information to others just like you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.